Tonight we're going to be looking at Psalm 125. Look with me in your Bibles at Psalm 125, where the psalmist begins in verse 1 with this. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forevermore. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, lest the righteous stretch out their hands to do wrong. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, and to those who are upright in their hearts. But those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead away with evildoers. Peace be upon Israel. I bet that if you examine your conversation over the last couple weeks, I'm sure you would find one or multiple of the following topics. Rising gas prices, inflation, the poor state of our economy, war abroad, gun violence at home, the threat of government control and tyranny, the degradation of morality in our society, and the dishonesty and corruption of elected officials. For full disclosure, I can tell you that I have talked about and worried about each one of these things on this list in just the last week alone. And to be honest, it can be overwhelming. It can feel overwhelming in the sense that there's so much to be fearful about. It can also be overwhelming in the sense that these concerns can dominate your life. And you know what the funny thing is? I'm filming this 2 weeks before you're watching it. And I'm sure that in the time between I'm filming it and now that you're watching it, there's something else that's happened that you could add to that list. This is why we need to meditate on passages like Psalm 125. Psalm 125 is a call to put your trust in the Lord. As we approach this psalm, I want you to be thinking about this one main point. That is simply this. Our reasons to trust in the Lord are greater than our reasons to fear. Let me say that one more time. Our reasons to trust in the Lord are greater than our reasons to be afraid. Psalm 125 is a song of praise describing 5 reasons why we should trust in the Lord. The psalmist is praising the Lord for his qualities, for his characters, and he's demonstrating the impact that the characteristics of God should have on his life and on the life of the nation of Israel. And each verse shows one more reason why we should trust in the Lord. As we study these, we'll see why our reasons to trust in the Lord are greater than our reasons for fear. Reasons to trust in the Lord start with verse number 1, and that is this, God's stability. You see, our God is a firm foundation. He is stable and secure. Thus, the psalmist says that all who trust in the Lord shall be like Mount Zion. Notice what it says in verse 1. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. Mount Zion is the hill in Jerusalem where David set up the tabernacle and where Solomon built the temple. It has been established by God as the resting place for his name, and thus it symbolizes the stability of God himself. Just as Mount Zion has been established and cannot be moved, so those who trust in the Lord find the same stability in their lives. Charles Spurgeon put it this way, faith in God is a settling and establishing virtue. He who by his strength setteth fast the mountains, by that same power stays the hearts of those who trust in him. The stability of God is seen in his immutability. Notice some of these passages. Malachi chapter 3 verse 6 says, "For I, the Lord, do not change." In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8, it says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And Isaiah 26, verses 3 and 4 says, You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock. We can trust in the Lord because of God's stability. The second reason we can trust in the Lord is because of God's protection. Notice what the psalmist says in verse 2. He says, "As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forevermore." In verse 1, he says that the one who trusts in the Lord is like Mount Zion. Now, here in verse 2, he says that the Lord is like the mountains which surround Jerusalem, in which Mount Zion is located. You see, in the same way that the mountains surround Jerusalem, the Lord surrounds his people. This is a picture of protection, a picture of defense. This protection is for his people. And this phrase, his people, in verse 2, harkens back to those in verse 1 who trust in the Lord. As we'll see in the next verse, this protection does not necessarily mean that we will always be protected from physical harm. But he surrounds those who trust in him, and he keeps them safe in his will, even if his will means to go through difficult times. Thus, we see in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "Who by God's power are being guarded through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time." Here we see that we are being guarded by God's power, and that divine protection comes through faith. It's for those who trust in the Lord. When you place your faith in the Lord, you are safe. I want you to notice, too, the extent of his protection. In both verse 1 and verse 2, the psalmist speaks of that which lasts forever. The stability of the believer who trusts in the Lord shall abide forever, it says. And the protection of the Lord is for this time forth and forevermore. Again, Charles Spurgeon puts it this way. He says, "This steadfastness will endure forever, and we may be assured, therefore, that no believer shall perish either in life or in death, in time or in eternity. We trust in an eternal God, and our safety shall be eternal." The third reason we can trust in the Lord is because of God's faithfulness. We've seen, first of all, God's stability, second, God's protection, and now number 3, God's faithfulness. And we see this reason in verse 3. Notice what the psalmist says. He says, "For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, lest the righteous stretch out their hands to do wrong." You know, as I said before, this verse here shows that God's protection does not necessarily mean that we will never experience difficult times or even physical harm. Even God's chosen people experience periods of tragedy and hardship. The psalmist describes a time when the scepter of wickedness was over the land. Perhaps this is referring to a time of foreign domination, like in the time of the judges or just before the Babylonian captivity. Or this may be referring to a time when Israel was ruled by a wicked king, such as King Manasseh. Though the righteous may go through times of distress and wickedness, the Lord will sustain them during those times. This is the faithfulness of God. The psalmist says that the scepter of the wicked shall not rest on the land. These times of distress and wickedness will not last forever. This is so, as the rest of the verse says, lest the righteous will stretch out their hands to do wrong. The faithfulness of God is such that though he may bring us through difficult times, he will never allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able. This is exactly what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. He says here that no temptation has taken you but such as is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you to be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation will make a way of escape so that you may be able to bear it. You notice, though you may go through difficult times, as Paul says, God is faithful. And so we can trust in the Lord because the Lord is faithful. The fourth reason we can trust in the Lord is because, number 4, God's goodness. After focusing on the trials of the righteous in verse 3, the psalmist then in verse 4 turns to the goodness of God. He says, "Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, and to those who are upright in their hearts." God's goodness is such that he will do good to those who do good. He will not forget his people. He will not leave your good works unrewarded. This theme of reward is woven throughout the scriptures. And what makes this even more amazing is when you realize that in truth, none of us are good. None of us are upright in heart. What does the Bible say about us? Think about some of these verses from Romans chapter 3. Romans 3 verse 10 says, "None is righteous, no, not one." And Romans 3:12 says, "None does good, not even one." You see, it's only by God's grace that we are saved, and it's only by his grace that we can do anything good. So God gives us his righteousness, he enables us to do good works, and then he rewards us for the work that he did in us. How amazing is that? That just shows how good God is and the goodness of God. Man, it's all the reason that we need to trust in him. But this is number 4 on the list, and there's still one more to come. And so we see verse 5 where he says this, "But those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead away with evildoers. Peace be upon Israel." Here we see the 5th reason for trusting in the Lord, and that is God's justice. While God rewards those who are good, he will punish those who do evil. The author actually highlights 2 groups of people, but he says that each will have the same fate. He talks about those who turn aside to crooked ways, and he talks about evildoers in that they will both be led away. Evildoers are those who openly practice wickedness. These are people who live openly wicked lifestyles. They have no shame in their sin. Obviously, they will experience the judgment of God. But those who turn aside to their crooked ways will also be led away. They will also experience the justice of God. So many people go their own way. They don't walk in God's way. But are they really that bad? We need to understand that a slight deviation from God's way may seem like a small thing, but such a circumbendibus will undoubtedly have dramatic effect. Turning to evil starts by turning away from the Lord. Even the slightest turn will eventually lead you off course. God's justice is such that no matter how trivial in our eyes, he will not let sin go unpunished. Though we may go through difficult times, though the scepter of wickedness may be over us for a time, God's justice will bring about what is right in the end. And this is why you can trust in the Lord.